The Stork Club, Manhattan, February 1946. When Lucky Luciano walked into the VIP room, every mobster at the table stood up except one. Bumpy Johnson kept his seat, cigar burning, eyes locked on the man who'd just unified the entire Italian Mafia. Luciano's bodyguards reached for their guns, but Luciano raised his hand because the black man sitting across from him controlled something Luciano needed more than muscle: Harlem's numbers racket. And what Bumpy said in the next 60 seconds would either forge an alliance that changed organized crime forever, or start a war that would paint New York streets red. February 1946. World War II was over, and America was celebrating. Soldiers were coming home, factories were retooling for peacetime, and the economy was booming. But in the smoke-filled back rooms of New York City, a different kind of war was brewing. A war for control of America's most profitable criminal enterprises. Lucky Luciano, the man who'd modernized the mafia and turned a collection of street gangs into a sophisticated criminal corporation, had just been released from Dannemora prison after serving 9 years. The government had made him a deal. Help us win the war by using your connections with the Italian docks to prevent sabotage and gather intelligence, and we'll commute your sentence. Luciano had delivered beyond their expectations. His network had kept the docks secure. His contacts had provided crucial intelligence about Italian operations, and some said his influence had even helped with the Allied invasion of Sicily. But there was a catch. The government didn't advertise deportation. In less than 3 weeks, the feds were shipping him back to Italy permanently. He would never again set foot on American soil. And Luciano, being the strategic mastermind he was, wasn't gonna leave without securing his empire for the next generation. The 5 families were in order. Frank Costello was running the Luciano family in his absence, maintaining the delicate balance of power that Lucky had established. Vito Genovese was scheming from Italy, positioning himself for Lucky's permanent absence. Albert Anastasia controlled the docks and the murder-for-hire business that kept everyone in line. Everything was set except for one problem: Harlem. The numbers racket, the illegal lottery that made millions every week, was booming in Harlem like nowhere else in the city. This wasn't small-time gambling. The numbers game was generating more money than some legitimate businesses, and the profits were staggering. Every day, thousands of people bet their nickels, dimes, and dollars on 3-digit combinations, hoping their number would hit and change their lives. The winning number was based on something seemingly random, like the last 3 digits of the day's stock market totals, or racetrack handle. When someone hit, they could win 600 to 1 on their bet. A nickel could become $30, enough to feed a family for a week, and the Italians wanted in. They saw millions flowing through Harlem every month, and they wanted their cut of every dollar. They'd tried before in 1935, when Dutch Schultz muscled his way into the business, but Schultz had made a fatal mistake. He'd underestimated a quiet, sharp-dressed enforcer named Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Schultz had come to Harlem with the same tactics he'd used everywhere else: intimidation, violence, and the assumption that black operators would simply hand over their territory to a white gangster. He'd been wrong, dead wrong. Bumpy had systematically dismantled Schultz's operation, turning his own men against him, cutting off his supplies, and making it clear that Harlem would never bow to outside control. Schultz ended up dead in a New Jersey tavern, shot to pieces while eating dinner. Some said it was a commission hit for drawing too much attention. Others whispered that Bumpy had orchestrated it. Either way, the message was clear: Harlem was not for sale. Now, 11 years later, Luciano wanted what Schultz couldn't take. But Luciano was smarter than Schultz. Much smarter. He'd done his homework. He knew that Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another street tough who'd gotten lucky. Bumpy was a strategist, a businessman, and a leader who commanded genuine respect in Harlem. The community trusted him not because they feared him, but because he protected them. When white landlords turned to evict black families, Bumpy intervened. When corrupt cops shook down local businesses, Bumpy made it stop. When numbers runners were robbed by outside crews, Bumpy got their money back and made sure it never happened again. He was more than a criminal. He was Harlem's unofficial mayor. So Luciano knew you couldn't just roll into Harlem with guns blazing. You had to talk first. You had to show respect. You had to make an offer that sounded like a partnership rather than a takeover. So Luciano sent word to Bumpy Johnson: "Let's meet." Bumpy didn't respond for a week. That alone told Luciano everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to be easy. The Stork Club on East 53rd Street was the most exclusive nightclub in Manhattan. This wasn't just any speakeasy or neighborhood joint. The Stork Club was where power met pleasure, where celebrities rubbed shoulders with politicians and gangsters alike. Frank Sinatra performed there regularly. J. Edgar Hoover was known to take his dinner at Table 50. Walter Winchell held court at his permanent booth, trading gossip and influence with whoever could afford the price of admission. The club's owner, Sherman Billingsley, had connections that reached into every level of New York society, from Wall Street bankers to Tammany Hall politicians to the very gangsters who kept his establishment running smoothly. It was neutral ground, the kind of place where deals were made and wars were prevented. And on the night of February 18, 1946, Lucky Luciano had reserved the entire VIP room, spending more money than most people made in a year just to ensure privacy for this one conversation. He brought 6 men with him: Frank Costello, his acting boss; Albert Anastasia, the Lord High Executioner; Meyer Lansky, the accountant; and 3 bodyguards who'd killed more men than they could count. Bumpy Johnson walked in alone. He was 40 years old, dressed in a tailored 3-piece suit, navy blue with a crisp white shirt. No tie. He never wore ties. A gold watch chain hung from his vest pocket. His hair was freshly cut, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and in his right hand he carried a leather briefcase. The bodyguards moved toward him, hands reaching for weapons, but Luciano raised one finger. "Let him through." Bumpy walked past them without a glance, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He pulled out a chair at the head of the table, the seat usually reserved for the boss, and sat down. The symbolism was unmistakable. In mob meetings, seating arrangements mattered. Where you sat told everyone in the room exactly where you stood in the hierarchy. The head of the table was power, the sides were subordinates. And Bumpy Johnson, walking into a room full of Italian mobsters, had just claimed the throne. He placed his briefcase on the table, then pulled out a cigar. Nobody moved. The tension was electric. Costello's jaw tightened, his face reddening with barely contained anger. Anastasia's hand drifted toward his waistband, his killer's instinct responding to what looked like deliberate disrespect. But Luciano just smiled, because he recognized what Bumpy was doing. This wasn't disrespect. This was a masterclass in negotiation. Bumpy was establishing the terms of the conversation before anyone said a word. He was making it clear that he wasn't coming to this meeting as a supplicant, asking for favors. He was coming as an equal, ready to deal from a position of strength. Luciano took the seat directly across from him. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming." Bumpy lit his cigar, took a long drag, and blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Mr. Luciano, you wanted to talk, so talk." Luciano folded his hands on the table. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who'd negotiated with presidents and gangsters and knew the difference between the two. "I'm leaving the country in 3 weeks. The feds are shipping me back to Italy, but before I go, I need to make sure New York stays in order. No wars, no chaos, just business." Bumpy nodded slowly, said nothing. "Harlem is the last piece of the puzzle," Luciano continued. "The numbers racket is making millions. My people want in, but I know you've been running things up there since Schultz died. You've got the trust of the community. You've got the infrastructure. You've got the police on your payroll." He paused, looking Bumpy directly in the eyes. "I'm not here to take what's yours, Bumpy. I'm here to offer you a partnership. You keep running Harlem. We provide protection, investment capital, and connection. In return, we take 40% of the profits. You get to stay independent, but under our umbrella, under our protection." The room was silent. Frank Costello leaned forward, watching Bumpy's reaction. Meyer Lansky's fingers drummed softly on the table. Albert Anastasia cracked his knuckles. Bumpy took another drag from his cigar. "What happens if I say no?" Luciano's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Then we have a problem, because if you're not with us, you're against us. And nobody survives being against us." It wasn't said with anger. It wasn't said with heat. It was said with the absolute certainty of a man who'd built an empire on that exact principle. Bumpy set his cigar down in the crystal ashtray, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a single photograph. He slid it across the table with the casual confidence of a man playing his ace. Luciano picked it up. His face didn't change, but his fingers tightened around the edges. The photograph showed a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, one of Anastasia's gambling operations. And standing in front of it, shaking hands with a known police captain, was Albert Anastasia himself. The photo was crystal clear, taken from close range with professional equipment. "That was taken 3 days ago," Bumpy said quietly. "I've got 12 more just like it. Different warehouses, different cops, different members of your organization. Some of them would be very interesting to the district attorney. Others would fascinate the newspapers. A few might even catch the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The implication hit the room like a thunderbolt. Bumpy hadn't just been running Harlem. He'd been running a sophisticated intelligence operation, documenting the Italian family's activities with the patience and precision of a federal task force. Every illegal meeting, every corrupt payoff, every violation of their parole agreements, he had it all on film. The room went deathly quiet. Costello's hand moved toward his jacket. Anastasia stood up halfway out of his chair, but Luciano just stared at the photograph, and then at Bumpy. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Bumpy said. "I'm showing you respect, because I could have sent these to the district attorney. I could have sent them to the newspapers. I could have burned your whole operation to the ground before you even knew I had them. But I didn't." He leaned forward. "You came to Harlem asking for a partnership, but a partnership means equals. And what you just offered me wasn't a partnership. It was a takeover with a smile." Luciano set the photograph down. For the first time since Bumpy entered the room, he looked genuinely impressed. "So what do you want?" Bumpy picked up his cigar, took a slow drag, let the question hang in the air. "You want what Schultz wanted, what every Italian crew that's ever looked at Harlem wanted. Control. But you can't have it. Not because you're not smart enough. Not because you're not strong enough. Because Harlem isn't yours to control." He pointed to the window toward the lights of Uptown. "You know why Schultz failed? Because he thought black people were stupid. He thought we'd just hand over our money and say thank you. He thought muscle was enough. But Harlem doesn't work that way. You need trust. You need respect. You need to be one of us. And you'll never be one of us." Costello started to speak, but Luciano silenced him with a look. Bumpy continued. "But here's what I will do. You asked for 40%, you can have 10% of the profits. Not as protection money, as a service fee. You provide banking support. We need clean money to pay winners when the heavy numbers hit. You provide legal help when our runners get arrested. You provide political connections when we need permits or want heat taken off our operations. In return, you get 10% of the net, which I guarantee will be more money than you'd make trying to run things yourself, because you don't understand Harlem." He leaned back, his voice dropping an octave. "And one more thing. You never, and I mean never, send your people into Harlem to collect. You don't send enforcers to intimidate our operators. You don't send collectors to shake down our policy banks. You don't send soldiers to patrol our street. You want your money, you send a courier to my office. I'll have it counted, wrapped and ready. But your soldiers don't patrol my streets. Your guns don't show up in my neighborhood. Harlem stays black. Harlem stays mine. That's the deal." The silence that followed was absolute. Meyer Lansky broke it first. He turned to Luciano. "Charlie, that's actually a smart play. 10% for essentially no risk. No overhead and no exposure. It's clean money." Anastasia wasn't convinced. "And what's to stop him from cutting us out once we set up the banking?" Bumpy answered before Luciano could. "The same thing that stops you from trying to take Harlem by force. Mutual assured destruction. You try to cheat me, those photographs go public, and your political protection evaporates. I try to cheat you. You come after me with everything you've got. We both lose. Or we both get rich. Your choice." Lucky Luciano stared at Bumpy Johnson for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly he started to laugh. Not a mocking laugh. A genuine one. "You know what, Bumpy? Schultz was an idiot. He should have talked to you first." He stood up, extended his hand. 10%, banking and legal support, no soldiers in Harlem, and you deliver the money monthly. Bumpy stood, shook his hand. One firm grip. "We have a deal." Frank Costello exhaled. Meyer Lansky smiled. Even Anastasia sat back down, the tension bleeding out of the room. Luciano held onto Bumpy's hand for an extra second. "Let me tell you something, Bumpy. I've done business with presidents, cops, union bosses, killers. But you're the first man who came to my table and told me no without pulling a gun. That takes guts or stupidity. I haven't decided which yet." Bumpy smiled. A rare, genuine smile. When you figure it out, let me know. 3 weeks later, Lucky Luciano boarded a ship to Italy. He never returned to American soil, but the deal he made with Bumpy Johnson held for the next 22 years. The numbers racket flourished. Bumpy paid the 10%, like clockwork. The Italians provided banking through legitimate fronts. When Bumpy got arrested in 1951 and sent to Alcatraz, Frank Costello personally made sure his family was taken care of. And when Bumpy walked out of prison in 1963, the deal was still intact. That meeting at the Stork Club became a legend in organized crime circles. Not because of violence, not because of threats, but because two men from completely different worlds sat down and found a way to do business without destroying each other. Luciano would later tell associates in Italy, "Bumpy Johnson was the smartest gangster I ever met, and the most dangerous, because he didn't need me to respect him. He demanded it." Bumpy never talked publicly about the meeting, but people close to him said he kept that photograph of Anastasia in his office for the rest of his life. Not as a threat, as a reminder. Power isn't about who's willing to pull the trigger first. It's about who's smart enough not to. February 18th, 1946. The night two legends sat down as enemies and stood up as partners. The night Bumpy Johnson proved that respect isn't given, it's negotiated. The night the Italian Mafia learned that some kings can't be conquered, only treated as equals. The handshake that held for 22 years and changed organized crime forever. This is how real power works. Not through the barrel of a gun, but through the strength of your word and the intelligence to know when to use it.